Hey guys, welcome to North Star Knife Reviews. Today we are going to talk about budget steels. And I don't have an example of everything that I've got listed here, but these are a lot of the main budget steels. And we're going to talk a little bit about them. Now, I'm not a metallurgist. I'm not an expert in this. Don't take this as gospel. This is just the research that I've done over time and having used knives. So one of the things I like to do with this channel, hopefully, is help out new guys who are new to this. And there are going to be planes going over because I'm out in the backyard. So probably going to get a couple interruptions here, but we can look at knives while that happens. Anyway, what I want to do in just a second. What I want to do is, I've had knives for decades, but when I really started getting interested in moderns, because all I had was for a long time was traditionals, started getting interested in moderns. I started watching channels, and it was like, oh my God, if you don't have at least S35V, or Maximet or Elmax or whatever the steel of the day is, your knife is worthless. And it's like, oh my God, what do I have to spend all this money? No, you don't. Just recognize what your steel can and can't do and buy accordingly. My mantra is there's no good or bad steel. There's only good or bad steel for your purpose. And any of these steels can be perfectly fine if you know what you're getting and you use it for the right purposes. Some of these things like the 3CR are not going to hold an edge very long, but if you're just looking for a knife that you're talking in a junk drawer or you want to learn to sharpen, it might be great, okay? So let's talk about these a little bit. Now, the CR steels, these are sort of the Chinese equivalents of a lot of other things, and I've got some of the equivalents listed. And basically what you're looking at here is the first number is the carbon content in tenths of a percentage. So 3CR13, for example, is 0.3% carbon, and then this number is the percentage of chromium. So 0.3% carbon, 13% chromium. And if you've got at least 13% chromium, you've got a stainless steel. Now, 3CR is very much a budget steel, but there are companies that use it. Cattleman's Cutlery uses it a lot, Elk Ridge, and you are not going to get a lot of edge retention. But you are going to get corrosion resistance. It's going to be very inexpensive typically, and that may be just as important to you. If you've got 15 bucks you can spend on a knife, well, that's going to be a factor, okay? The equivalent of this is 420 J2, which you see in a lot of Pakistani knives. A few Rough Riders I know do have it, but this is sort of very base level steel. I don't believe I have a 3CR here on the table, but 5CR 15 MOV, 0.5% carbon, 15% chromium. It's the equivalent of 420 HC. Examples of that, this little buck has 420 HC. Okay. The Cold Steel Kudu has 5CR. Right? These are basically the same steel. Not exactly, there might be a little bit of difference, but for all practical purposes, they're going to be the same thing. So if you know how 420 HC works and what the characteristics of that are, 5CR is going to be very similar. Now, I should say, steel is not the end of the story. It's only the beginning. Heat treat matters a lot. And, for example, 420 HC, Buck has this great reputation for doing a really good heat treat and getting the most out of it. Quite honestly, most big name knife manufacturers are going to do a perfectly fine heat treat. It's when you get those, these manufacturers you've maybe never heard of that you might want to be a little careful about it. But heat treat is important, okay? The steel type is potential. The heat treat determines whether or not that potential is met and to what extent, okay? So moving up, 7CR, 17, and you will see others. You might see, for example, the 5CR 15, you might see a 5CR 14, things like that. They're going to be pretty close. But the 7CR is going to be basically the equivalent of a 440A. So, for example, I'm doing this without a tripod, so hopefully it's not too shaky. 7CR, like this little Schrade old timer. Most of the Rough Riders, although I do understand Rough Rider has moved to 440B for some of their stuff. But this is going to be an example of that 440A. Again, a basic steel, but if you'll get okay edge retention. Depends what you use it for. But this is sort of where, the knife guys, 7CR, 5CR, 3CR, these aren't even worth your time. Don't bother looking at them. Okay, and some even say that about 8CR, which is a very common steel. 8CR is the equivalent of 440B or AUS 8. One example I have of that is this Boker Kalashnikov. All right, this is in AUS 8. It's going to be basically the same as 8CR or as 440B. 9CR is where you finally start to get into what even the knife guys think are acceptable steels. Now, don't get me wrong, I think everything below that is fine too, just as long as you know what you're getting into. But here's where you start getting into knives that will really hold a decent edge, or hold it long enough that the knife guys think it's okay. Okay, so 9CR 18 MOV, which is the same as 440C, which is the same basically as AUS 10. And here, this Tangram is in Akuto 440, which is a 440C. Okay, so here, one of the really nice things about 440C is it's very, very corrosion resistant. You've got 0.9% chromium, or excuse me, 0.9% carbon, 18% chromium. That makes a very, very corrosion resistant blade. And chromium also does some other things in the mix, changes the size of the carbides, that sort of thing. But 440C used to be top of the line. I have a book of custom knives that came out in about 93, 94, and probably 90% of the knives in there are made using 440C. So this, your grandpa or grandma would have been perfectly happy with a 440C knife because that would have been a really great blade. Now it's budget steel. All right, these things change, but this is still a good steel, guys. Then there's the AR RPM 9, which is the powder metallurgy version of this. And it's supposed to hold an edge just a little bit longer. Now we move into the Scandinavian steels, 12C27, 14C28N. Here it's a little weird. Divide this by 2 and you'll get the carbon content in tenths. So this is 0.6% carbon. Divide this by 2 and you'll get the chromium in percentage. So this is 13.5% chromium. 12C27 is one of the most common steels on budget European blades. The Mora stainless uses that. Opinels, if you're getting the stainless, you're going to have 12C27. This little knife from Rake is in 12C27. And then you get to 14C28N, which is, I think, really a great steel. It's got a lot of corrosion resistance, got good edge retention, and it's actually quite tough for a stainless steel, so it's not going to chip very easily. VG10, another really nice stainless steel, going to hold a really good edge, not quite as tough as the 14C28N, but might hold an edge just a little longer. Okay. Then we've got the carbon steels. They're your 10 series steels. These will range, most of the time, if you get a knife, it's going to be somewhere between a 1060 and a 1095. This is, well, I put the handle on this myself. But this blade, you can see it's patinaing. This is from BPS, excuse me. And this is in 1066. Basically, the lower the number here, and 1066 means, 1066 on this means it's about 0.66, on average, percent carbon. What you're going to find is that the lower the number, the less it's going to hold an edge, but the tougher it's going to be. So basically, the larger the blade, the lower you would probably want your number. Okay, 1095, everybody knows 1095, right? And I have this, hold on, gotta get it out of the sheath here. This Wood Jewel is in 1095. Or no, excuse me, this is not in 1095. This is in 80 CRV2. I apologize. Do I have a 1095? Maybe I don't have a 1095, but everybody knows what that is. Okay, I'm pretty familiar with it. 80 CRV2 is basically like 1080 or 1084, but it has chromium and vanadium added, along with a couple other things. And this quite honestly, is probably one of my favorite carbon steels because it is incredibly tough. And it also has pretty good edge retention. You're going to get probably better edge retention on this than you would on 1095 because the chromium and the vanadium affect the carbides. So this actually has good edge retention and very tough. Typically, the better edge retention, the less toughness you get. This one kind of has the best of both worlds. T10, this is what Rough Rider uses for their carbon steel. Very similar to 1095, maybe a little bit tougher. You see it a lot in swords, and then Rough Rider uses as well. And then D2, you know, which is sort of the budget steel of the day. About 1.5% carbon, so very high carbon on this, which makes it hold an edge. Usually around 11.5 to 12% chromium. Sorry, got one more plane going over. Okay. So with the D2, like on this Kubi, what you're going to have is probably the best edge retention out of any of these. Not going to have quite the greatest corrosion resistance, but unless you live on the Gulf Coast or something, it's probably not going to matter. Hope you guys found this interesting. You have a good day. Stay sharp. I will catch you next time.